Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was just finishing up a late shift at the dockyard when my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. Probably another one of those emergency tests the government runs. But when every phone around me started going off at once, mine, my coworkers, even the old radio inside the break room, I felt a knot form in my stomach. I pulled out my phone and swiped the notification open. The screen glowed with a red banner. Emergency alert shelter in place. Do not attempt to leave the island. Await further instructions. The words sent a chill through me. The others gathered around, their faces pale in the dim break room light. Nobody spoke. The radio crackled, switching from its usual static to a mechanical voice that sounded almost strained. This is an emergency broadcast. By order of the local authorities, the island is under immediate lockdown. Residents are instructed to remain indoors and secure all entry points. Do not approach unidentified individuals. Do not attempt to leave. Further updates will follow. Then the voice cut off. The station switched to dead air. No static, no background noise, just silence. Is this some kind of drill? Someone finally asked. But I could tell it wasn't. The way the air felt heavy, the way my hands had started shaking without me realizing. It was real. Then outside, the sirens began. Not just one or two, but dozens. Their wailing echoed through the streets, bouncing off the warehouses and fishing boats. We rushed to the windows, trying to see what was happening. That's when we noticed the ferry. Or rather, what was left of it. It had crashed against the dock, half submerged in the dark water. Pieces of debris floated nearby, and something else. Figures, moving in the mist, dragging themselves onto the shore. I thought it was survivors at first. But then one of them lifted its head. Its eyes were wrong. The figure on the shore twitched unnaturally as it pulled itself forward, limbs jerking like a puppet on tangled strings. Its clothes were shredded, soaked from the sea, clinging to a frame that looked wrong. Then it opened its mouth. The sound that came out wasn't human. It was a wet, rasping noise, like air forcing its way through something broken. The others, there were more of them now, turned their heads toward the dockyard, their movements lagging, delayed, like they were struggling to remember how to use their own bodies. A loud bang shook me out of my trance. One of my coworkers, Nolan, had dropped a wrench onto the concrete floor. Every head outside snapped toward the sound. And then they moved. Not walked. Not ran. Surged. It was like watching a wave crash in reverse. One moment, they were dragging themselves forward in slow, awkward lurches. Then, suddenly, they were sprinting, closing the distance between us in seconds. "Inside now!" someone shouted. We scrambled, shoving through the doorway as the first figure reached the glass. It didn't hesitate. It threw itself forward, headfirst into the window. The impact sent cracks spiderwebbing across the surface, but it didn't stop. Another figure slammed into the door. Then another. The entire building shuddered under the force of them. I grabbed a metal shelving unit and heaved it in front of the entrance. Nolan and the others followed, stacking whatever they could find. Crates, chairs, even an old vending machine. But the glass was giving way. We needed a plan. Fast. I turned toward the back exit, leading to the storage lot. "We need to get out of here, now." Nolan hesitated. The alert said to shelter in place. I pointed at the door, which was barely holding under the weight of bodies slamming against it. A low, warbling moan came from outside. "We won't last 5 minutes here." That was all it took. He nodded. Then we ran. We bolted through the back exit into the storage lot. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I barely noticed. My heart was hammering too hard. The others followed close behind, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. The lot was surrounded by a chain-link fence, the only way out a narrow alley leading toward the main road. Beyond that, the town. I don't know why I expected it to be quiet. The moment we rounded the corner, the reality of the situation hit me like a gut punch. The town wasn't just under lockdown, it was collapsing. Streetlights flickered over overturned cars, doors left swinging open. Some buildings were on fire. Others had shattered windows, streaked with something dark. Shadows moved between them, figures staggering, twitching, waiting. A scream cut through the air somewhere in the distance, then another. "We need to find a car," Nolan whispered, his voice barely audible. I scanned the street trying to think. The docks were useless. The ferry was wrecked. The roads leading out of town would be blocked, if not by the authorities, then by whatever was out here with us. Then I spotted it. A truck, still running, its headlights spilling onto the pavement. The driver's side door hung open, like someone had left in a hurry. Too much of a hurry. I raised a hand to stop the others, stepping forward cautiously. The interior of the truck was dark, but something about it felt off. Then I saw the fingers gripping the steering wheel. At first, I thought the driver was just sitting there, frozen in fear. But then I noticed the way their head hung at an unnatural angle, how their chest wasn't rising or falling, and how their eyes, glassy, unseeing, suddenly snapped to look at me. I stumbled back just as the thing in the driver's seat moved. Its body convulsed, twisting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. It was like watching a mannequin trying to pull itself apart. Then it lunged. The thing in the driver's seat lunged so fast I barely had time to react. Its body jerked forward, arms outstretched, fingers clawing at the air between us. Its mouth hung open but no scream came. Just a horrible, wet clicking sound. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing. Then Nolan slammed the door shut. The thing inside thrashed wildly, its body twisting against the glass, smearing something dark across the window. Its teeth gnashed, jaw working like it was trying to bite through the barrier between us. "Forget the truck," I shouted, already backing away. "We need to move." The others didn't need convincing. We turned and ran, cutting through an alleyway toward the heart of town. That's when we saw them. Dozens, no, hundreds of those things, spilling into the streets. Some crawled from wrecked buildings, dragging themselves over broken glass like they couldn't even feel it. Others moved with sickening speed, their bodies lurching unnaturally, like they had forgotten how human limbs were supposed to work. And then there were the sounds. The groaning, the clicking, the horrible, warped voices that seemed to repeat fragments of words, as if they were mimicking human speech but didn't quite remember how. Nolan grabbed my arm. "Where do we go?" I scanned our surroundings, mind racing. The stores were compromised, doors smashed, windows broken. The police station? No chance. If it was safe, there would have been officers outside, directing people, but there were no people. Then I saw it. The old radio station. It was perched on a small hill just outside the town square. A single road led up to it, and if we could get inside and barricade the entrance, we might stand a chance. "There," I pointed. "The station." Without hesitation, we sprinted toward it. The streets blurred around me, my body running on pure adrenaline. Behind us, the groans turned into screeches. They had seen us. They were coming. we ran like our lives depended on it, because they did. The things behind us weren't just following, they were hunting. Their movements were erratic, some sprinting on two legs, others dropping to all fours like wild animals. But no matter how they moved, they were fast. The radio station loomed ahead, a squat gray building surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. The gate was wide open, probably left that way in the chaos. "We're almost there," Nolan gasped. Then the worst possible thing happened. I tripped. My foot caught on a loose chunk of pavement, and I went down hard, my hands slamming against the rough asphalt. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs, and for a split second I was too stunned to move. A shadow fell over me. One of them was right there. It was so close I could see its face, what was left of it. The skin looked wrong, loose and stretched, as if it didn't quite fit the skull beneath. Its mouth twisted into something that almost resembled a grin. It lunged. A gunshot exploded through the air. The thing's head snapped back, and it collapsed just inches from me, twitching violently before going still. "Move!" Nolan hauled me up by the arm. I barely registered that he was holding a gun. No time for questions. We ran the last stretch, bursting through the radio station's front doors and slamming them shut behind us. Nolan and another guy, Luis, shoved a heavy desk in front of the entrance. Then, for the first time since this nightmare started, silence. I pressed my back against the wall, chest heaving. Where did you get that?" I finally managed, nodding to the gun in Nolan's hand. He gave me a wild, half-panicked look. "It was in the truck, glove compartment. Lucky, right?" I didn't answer. Something about the way the creatures moved, the way they looked at us, I wasn't sure a gun would be enough. A crackling sound made us all jump. The radio equipment was still on. A single red light blinked on the control panel, indicating a live broadcast. The speakers hissed, filled with static, until a voice cut through. A voice that shouldn't have been there. "We hear you." The voice sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just the words. It was the way they were spoken. Like a warped recording, the syllables stretched and broken, as if something was trying to mimic human speech but didn't quite understand how. "We hear you." The static pulsed, rising and falling like breath. Then, after a few seconds of silence, "We see you." Luis ripped the power cord from the wall. The speakers cut off with a sharp pop, plunging the station into heavy silence. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was our own breathing. Too fast, too shallow. I could still hear that voice in my head crawling under my skin. "We need to get out of here," Nolan muttered. "No," Luis said quickly. "No way. We stay put. We got walls, we've got a barricade. This is the safest place we've found." I wasn't sure about that. Something about the radio signal was wrong. Something was listening. I glanced at the equipment. The power was off, but the red broadcast light was still blinking. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Nolan followed my gaze. His face drained of color. The radio was still on. And then, just barely audible through the speakers, came the sound of footsteps. Not ours. Theirs. Outside, beyond the barricaded doors, something was gathering. We could hear the scrape of nails against metal, the shuffle of feet across pavement. Then came the knocking, slow, rhythmic, almost polite, and the voice returned. "Open the door." The knocking continued, steady, unnatural. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't frantic like before. It wasn't the desperate hammering of creatures trying to break in. No, this was worse. It was calculated, patient. Then the voice came again, clearer this time. "Open the door." I felt my stomach drop. The others heard it too. Luis clamped a hand over his mouth like he was going to be sick. Nolan tightened his grip on the gun. The voice was wrong. It was close, too close, like it was coming from just behind the door. And the worst part? It sounded like me. Not exactly, not perfectly, but close enough that my brain struggled to reject it. Like hearing yourself on a bad recording, distorted, stretched. "Don't listen," Nolan whispered. "It's a trick." Luis took an unsteady step back from the door. His face was pale, drenched in sweat. They can't talk, right? We've seen them. They just moan. Click, this is something else. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think. The emergency broadcast, the radio's still working after we unplugged it. The creatures mimicking us. It wasn't just a disease. It wasn't just an outbreak. Something else was here, something watching, listening, learning. The knocking stopped. For a moment, I thought, maybe, just maybe they had given up. Then, from the other side of the door, I heard a sound that froze me to the floor. The sound of a key turning in the lock. The lock clicked open. None of us had touched it. The door handle turned. Slow, deliberate. Like whoever was outside wasn't in a rush. Like they already knew we had nowhere left to go. Nolan fired. The shot rang through the station, deafening in the enclosed space. The door shuddered as the bullet punched through the wood. Silence, then laughter. Not natural laughter, not human. It started as a low gurgling chuckle and rose into a horrible, glitching distortion of sound, like 1,000 voices all trying to laugh at once but failing to get the rhythm right. The handle stopped turning. Something scraped against the door, then came the voice. My voice. That wasn't very nice. Luis cracked. He turned and bolted for the back hallway, disappearing into the darkness. "Luis, no!" I shouted, but it was too late. A second later, there was a noise, a wet, crunching snap. Then nothing. I wanted to run. I wanted to do anything but stand there paralyzed. But I couldn't move because the door was opening. Nolan grabbed my arm. "Upstairs," he hissed. We sprinted for the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time. Below us, the front door swung open. We didn't look back. At the top of the stairs, we found a storage room, nothing useful, but there was a window. I ran to it, shoving it open, feeling cold air rush in. Nolan glanced over the edge. It's a drop, but a sound cut him off. Footsteps, not from the stairs, from inside the room. We both froze. Slowly, too slowly, we turned. There was something standing in the corner. At first, I thought it was Luis. The shape was right, the height, the build, but when it stepped into the dim light, my stomach turned to ice. It had no face. Not really, just the suggestion of one. The skin too smooth, the mouth too wide, the head tilted too far, like it was still figuring out how to wear the body it had taken. And then it spoke. "We hear you." I shoved Nolan toward the window. "Go." We jumped. The fall knocked the wind out of me. Pain shot up my leg, but I ignored it. We were in the back alley now. Trees, open space. No time to hesitate, we ran. Behind us, the thing stepped up to the open window, watching, waiting, smiling. As we disappeared into the forest, the emergency broadcast played again. But this time, the voice was mine. "Shelter in place. Do not attempt to leave the island." And then, just before we were out of earshot, "We see you." Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.